Picture this. It's December 23rd, 1924, Christmas Eve. While families across Europe are preparing celebrations, gathering around trees, wrapping presents for their children, a group of men in expensive three-piece suits are boarding trains to Geneva, Switzerland. They're not going to celebrate Christmas. They're going to commit what might be the most successful corporate crime in history. These men represent the biggest lighting companies on the planet. General Electric from America, Osram from Germany, Philips from the Netherlands, companies from France, Hungary, Britain, even Japan. And they're about to make a decision that will cost consumers billions of dollars over the next century. They're going to deliberately, systematically engineer your light bulbs to fail. Here's the insane part. They already knew how to make light bulbs that lasted 2,500 hours or more. They'd been making them for years, but on that cold December day in Geneva, these executives signed a secret contract agreeing to limit light bulb life to just 1,000 hours. Think about that. They took products that worked perfectly well and intentionally made them worse. They didn't reduce the price. They didn't improve anything else. They just made them die faster. The conspiracy had a name, Phoebus. It sounds almost mythological, doesn't it? Like some ancient god of fire. But Phoebus SA was very real. It was registered in Switzerland, which was convenient, because Swiss banking secrecy laws meant nobody could easily investigate what they were doing. The contract they signed that day, contract number X2278-G, would eventually be discovered decades later in a courtroom. And when prosecutors read it, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. But here's what makes this story truly brilliant and terrifying. The conspiracy worked. For 15 years, until World War II broke it up, these companies controlled light bulb production across most of the industrialized world. They didn't just agree to limit bulb life. They created an entire enforcement system. They built laboratories in Switzerland, whose only job was to test light bulbs from member companies and fine them if the bulbs lasted too long. You read that right. Companies got fined for making products that were too good. And here's the question that should haunt every single person who's ever bought a smartphone, a printer, a washing machine, or any modern electronic device. What if this conspiracy never really ended? What if the Phoebus Cartel didn't die in 1939? What if it just evolved, mutated, and became the blueprint for how every single consumer product is designed today? Because when you look around at modern technology, when your phone battery mysteriously degrades after exactly 2 years, when your printer stops working right after the warranty expires, when software updates slow down your perfectly functional device, you have to wonder, are we living inside the world that Phoebus built? Before we dive deeper into this conspiracy, let me tell you something. If you're into stories about corporate greed, industrial sabotage, and the secret deals that shape the modern world, hit that subscribe button right now. And let me know in the comments if you'd ever heard about the Phoebus Cartel before watching this. Most people haven't. That's exactly what these companies wanted. Now, to understand why the light bulb conspiracy happened, you need to understand what the industrial world looked like in the 1920s. Think of it as the absolute Wild West of capitalism. Imagine if today's tech companies had zero regulation, no consumer protection laws, no antitrust enforcement, and everyone just accepted that corporations could do whatever they wanted. The 1920s were boom times. World War I was over. Cities everywhere were getting electrified. If you've ever seen old photos of cities transforming from gas lamps to electric lights, you know how dramatic this change was. It was like going from dial-up internet to fiber optic. No, actually, it was bigger than that. It was like going from sending letters by horseback to having instant global communication. Electric light changed everything, and that created a massive market. Everyone needed light bulbs, homes, offices, factories, streetlights. The demand seemed infinite. Companies were making money hand over fist. General Electric, founded on Thomas Edison's patents, was an absolute powerhouse. In Germany, Osram was dominating European markets. Philips in the Netherlands was expanding everywhere. These weren't just companies. They were industrial empires. But here's the problem they faced, and this is where the conspiracy begins to make twisted sense from their perspective. They'd gotten too good at making light bulbs. By the early 1920s, the technology was pretty much perfected. Tungsten filaments, gas-filled bulbs, mass production. A typical light bulb in 1920 could last 2,500 hours or more. Some experimental bulbs were reaching 4,000 hours. There's even a bulb in Livermore, California that's been burning since 1901. It's still working today. Let that sink in. For consumers, this was fantastic. You bought a light bulb, screwed it in, and forgot about it for years. But for the companies, it was a nightmare. Think about it from their evil corporate perspective. If everyone buys a bulb that lasts 4 years instead of 1 year, you sell 75% fewer bulbs. Your factory workers are sitting idle. Your shareholders are furious. Your stock price crashes. This is what happened to Osram. In 1921, they sold 63 million bulbs. By 1923, they were down to 28 million. Sales cut in half in just 2 years. Not because their products were bad, because their products were too good. People didn't need to buy new bulbs, because the old ones wouldn't die. William Meinhardt, the chairman of Osram, looked at these numbers and realized they had what you might call a quality problem. His company had perfected the art of making excellent light bulbs, and it was killing their business. So he started reaching out to other companies, not to compete, to conspire. The conversation basically went like this. We all have the same problem. We're too good at what we do. Customers are too satisfied. What if we all agreed to make our products just a little bit worse? Not so bad that people complain. Just bad enough that they have to buy new ones more often. And here's what makes this both genius and evil. They didn't present it as a conspiracy. They called it standardization. They called it efficiency. They claimed that shorter life bulbs were actually better for consumers because they burned brighter. It was complete nonsense, but it sounded reasonable. Like when tech companies today tell you that removing the headphone jack from your phone is courage, or that you can't repair your own device because of security. The international situation helped them pull this off. See, in the 1920s, cartels weren't as illegal as they are today. Monopolies were common. Companies openly colluded. Governments mostly looked the other way, because big corporations meant economic power, jobs, tax revenue. The idea of consumer protection barely existed. If a company wanted to make inferior products, well, that was just business. But what Phoebus did went beyond normal corporate greed. They didn't just make inferior products. They engineered an entire global system to ensure nobody could make better products. They turned quality control into quality destruction. And they got away with it for 15 years. So who were the people behind this conspiracy? Let's talk about the masterminds. Because unlike most corporate crimes where the executives hide behind lawyers and plausible deniability, we actually have their names, their correspondence, and in some cases their exact words explaining why they were screwing over consumers. William Meinhardt, the Osram chairman, was the architect. Think of him as the criminal mastermind who brought everyone to the table. He wasn't some cartoon villain twirling his mustache. He was a respectable businessman, probably went to church, donated to charity, had a family. But when he looked at Osram's declining sales figures, he saw a problem that needed a creative solution. And his solution was to organize the world's first documented planned obsolescence conspiracy. Meinhardt's genius, if you want to call it that, was recognizing that this couldn't be a one-company strategy. If Osram alone started making shorter life bulbs, customers would just buy from Philips or General Electric or any competitor still making better products. The only way this worked was if everyone agreed to do it simultaneously. A coordinated global downgrade of product quality. Then there's Anton Philips, the head of the Dutch Philips company. This guy is probably the most quotable villain in the whole story because we have his actual written correspondence. In internal company documents that were later discovered, Phillips wrote, and I'm quoting here, "We must not sink back into the same mire by paying no attention to voltages and supplying lamps that will have a very prolonged life." Read that again. The same mire. He's talking about the terrible, awful situation of making products that last too long. He's saying that making good products is like being stuck in mud. That's not me interpreting his words unfavorably. That's literally what he wrote. The man saw durability as a problem to solve, not a feature to advertise. Phillips was known as the enforcer of the cartel. When companies weren't meeting their quotas for inferior quality, when their bulbs were lasting too long, Phillips was apparently one of the people pushing for strict enforcement of the fines. He believed in the conspiracy. He defended it in internal communications. He was all in. From America, you had Gerard Swope, the president of General Electric. Now, GE's role is interesting because they operated through international subsidiaries. The main conspiracy was run through something called International General Electric, based in Europe. This gave them plausible deniability in the United States while they participated fully in the global conspiracy. Swope was connected to everyone who mattered in American business and government. He was the kind of executive who had the Secretary of Commerce on speed dial, metaphorically speaking. This wasn't some rogue businessman operating in the shadows. This was a pillar of the American establishment. When GE eventually got busted in 1949, the court documents revealed that they'd been in on the conspiracy from day one. But here's what makes these men fascinating from a historical perspective. They genuinely seemed to believe they weren't doing anything wrong. In their worldview, they were stabilizing the market. They were preventing wasteful competition. They used language that made collusion sound like responsible business practice. There were dozens of other executives involved. Representatives from Tungsram in Hungary, executives from French lighting companies. Eventually, even Tokyo Electric from Japan joined the conspiracy. This was truly global. They divided up the world like a giant board game. You take Africa, we'll take South America. They'll handle Asia. Everyone got a territory. Everyone agreed on the rules. And the rules were simple. No bulb should last more than 1,000 hours. If your bulbs exceeded that limit, you got fined. The money from those fines went back to the cartel, strengthening the conspiracy. They literally created a system that financially punished companies for making good products. Think about the engineers working for these companies. You're a talented engineer who spent years learning how to make better, longer-lasting filaments. You figured out the perfect tungsten composition. You mastered the gas filling technique. You're proud of your work. Then one day your boss comes to you and says, "Great work. Now make it worse. We need these bulbs to burn out faster." Some engineers must have protested. There had to be people in these companies who thought this was insane. But they were overruled by the business side. Profits matter more than pride. Shareholder value trumps engineering excellence. If you refused, well, there were plenty of other engineers willing to do what they were told. The conspiracy also needed lawyers. Not just any lawyers, but specialists in international patent law who could construct the legal framework for market control. These lawyers created cross-licensing agreements, which sound boring and technical, but were actually the chains that locked all these companies together. If you wanted to manufacture light bulbs, you needed patents. If you needed patents, you had to join the cartel. If you joined the cartel, you agreed to the 1,000-hour limit. But what nobody knew was that this entire conspiracy was about to become visible in a way the executives never anticipated. Because everything they were doing, every agreement they signed, every fine they issued, every internal memo they wrote was being documented. And one day, those documents would end up in a courtroom. So why did they do it? I mean, we know the surface reason: profits. But let's dig deeper into the psychology and economics that made planned obsolescence seem not just acceptable, but necessary to these executives. The fundamental problem was that light bulbs had become too perfect. This sounds ridiculous, right? How can a product be too good? But from a business perspective, perfection is actually a disaster. If you make a perfect product that never needs replacing, you sell it once and then nothing. You've eliminated your own future sales. This is called the durability dilemma, and it affects every manufacturer of durable goods. If you make refrigerators that last 50 years, you only sell a new one twice in a human lifetime. If you make cars that run for 30 years, without major repairs, you've destroyed the automotive aftermarket. If you make light bulbs that last a decade, you've made yourself obsolete. Modern companies solve this through innovation. They convince you to upgrade even though your old product works fine. Your phone from 3 years ago still works? Sure, but this new one has a better camera. Your car runs great? Yeah, but the new model has better safety features. They create demand through improvement, at least theoretically. But in the 1920s, light bulb technology had plateaued. There wasn't much left to improve. A bulb from 1920 did the same thing as a bulb from 1925. It turned electricity into light. Nobody was impressed by marginal brightness improvements. You couldn't market new features because there weren't any meaningful new features. So Meinhardt and the other executives faced a choice. Option 1, accept reduced sales, downsize, return money to shareholders, and become a smaller but stable company. Option 2, find a way to force people to buy more bulbs, even though they don't need them. They chose option 2. But they couldn't just make the bulbs obviously worse. If a bulb lasted 100 hours instead of 2,000, people would notice and complain. They needed to find the sweet spot. Long enough that customers don't revolt, short enough to maximize replacement purchases. Through trial and error, they settled on 1,000 hours. Here's the brilliant part. 1,000 hours sounds like a lot to a consumer. If you use a bulb for 3 hours a day, that's almost a year of life. Most people thought that was reasonable. They didn't know that the exact same bulb could easily be designed to last 2 or 3 years. The companies had successfully manipulated the reference point. Now, implementing this conspiracy required serious coordination. You can't just send a telegram saying, "Hey everyone, let's make worse products." You need structure. You need enforcement. You need to solve the free rider problem, which is what economists call the temptation for one company to cheat on a cartel agreement and gain a competitive advantage. That's where the Swiss laboratory came in, and this is where the conspiracy becomes almost comically elaborate. They established a centralized testing facility in Switzerland, neutral territory where all the member companies could send their bulbs for evaluation. These labs had one job: measure how long bulbs lasted and find companies whose products exceeded the 1,000-hour limit. Think about what this means. They built an entire scientific operation dedicated to enforcing bad quality. They hired engineers and technicians whose job was to make sure light bulbs weren't too good. It's like hiring a personal trainer whose goal is to make sure you don't get too healthy. The fine system was calibrated carefully. If your bulbs averaged 1,050 hours, small fine. 1,200 hours, bigger fine. 1,500 hours, massive fine. The penalties were designed to make it financially stupid to produce better products. A company could save money on manufacturing by using cheaper materials that burned out faster and avoid the fines simultaneously. Double win for the bottom line. Double loss for consumers. But there was a problem. How do you get engineers to deliberately sabotage their own work? How do you convince quality control departments to check for excellence and then punish it? How do you overcome the professional pride of people who spent careers mastering their craft? The answer was simple. You don't tell the workers what you're doing. The engineers thought they were optimizing for efficiency or meeting new international standards. The assembly line workers had no idea that their company was part of a global conspiracy. Only the top executives knew the truth. Everyone else just followed the new specifications handed down from management. To make bulbs burn out faster, they used several techniques. They could adjust the filament thickness, making it slightly thinner so it burned hotter and died sooner. They could change the gas mixture inside the bulb. They could alter the voltage specifications so bulbs ran at higher temperatures than optimal. None of these changes were obvious to consumers. The bulbs looked identical. They just died faster. And here's the dark genius of it. Because all the major manufacturers were doing the same thing simultaneously, there was no benchmark for comparison. If every bulb on the market lasts about 1,000 hours, consumers assume that's just how long bulbs last. It's like if every smartphone manufacturer agreed to make batteries that degrade after 18 months. Oh wait, that's basically what happened. The cartel also had to deal with independent manufacturers, smaller companies that weren't part of Phoebus. These rebels could have exposed the conspiracy by advertising longer life bulbs. So Phoebus used a combination of tactics: patent lawsuits to tie them up in court, predatory pricing to undercut them temporarily, and in some cases, acquisition offers to buy them out and shut them down. In Scandinavia, some companies resisted. Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian manufacturers formed an alliance and sold longer life bulbs at lower prices. They became genuine heroes of the story, defending consumers against the cartel. But they were limited to their local markets. Phoebus controlled most of the world. The conspiracy also depended on keeping the press quiet. In the 1920s and 30s, business journalism wasn't investigative like today. Newspapers depended on advertising revenue from these same companies. Trade publications were essentially controlled by industry associations. If you were a reporter who discovered something suspicious, good luck getting it published. Your editor's boss probably played golf with someone from General Electric. Academic corruption played a role too. The cartel funded research to promote theories about optimal bulb efficiency that conveniently supported the 1,000-hour limit. They paid scientists to write papers suggesting that shorter life bulbs were actually better for consumers because they burned brighter or more efficiently. It was pseudoscience, but it gave them cover. But what nobody at Phoebus anticipated was that their own documentation would doom them. These executives were meticulous. They kept records. They filed reports. They wrote memos. They created paper trails that would eventually be discovered by government investigators 2 decades later. And when those documents went public, the world finally learned the truth. Let's talk about how this actually worked day to day. Because the mechanics of the conspiracy are fascinating in a horrifying way. This wasn't just a handshake deal in a smoke-filled room. This was an industrial operation running across multiple continents with the precision of a military campaign. The Swiss testing laboratory was the nerve center. Imagine a clean, well-lit facility filled with rows upon rows of light bulbs, each one burning in a controlled environment. Technicians in white coats monitored electrical consumption, brightness levels, and most importantly, lifespan. Every member company had to regularly send sample batches of their bulbs to Switzerland for testing. The samples would arrive by train or ship, carefully packaged in wooden crates. Swiss customs officials probably had no idea what was really going on. Just another shipment of light bulbs for quality testing, right? Nothing suspicious about that. Except these weren't quality tests in the normal sense. They were conspiracy enforcement operations. The lab workers would screw in the bulbs, connect them to precisely calibrated electrical systems, and let them burn. Days would pass, weeks. They'd keep meticulous records. Bulb number 347 from the Osram batch, 980 hours, good. Bulb number 348 from the Philips shipment, 1,120 hours, problem. That would trigger a fine. The whole system ran on monthly reporting cycles. At the end of each month, the Swiss laboratory would compile data and send it to Phoebus headquarters, which was also in Switzerland. The headquarters would calculate fines based on how much each company's bulbs exceeded the 1,000-hour threshold. Then they'd send invoices. Yes, invoices. For making products too well. Can you imagine being the accountant who had to process these? Let's see, we owe Phoebus 15,000 Swiss francs because our light bulbs lasted too long. Better pay that invoice so we can keep participating in the illegal cartel that's defrauding consumers worldwide. Just another day at the office. But the conspiracy went beyond just testing. Phoebus also divided up global markets like organized crime families, dividing up territory. General Electric got North America and parts of South America. Osram got Germany and Eastern Europe. Philips got the Netherlands and Indonesia, which was a Dutch colony at the time. French companies got France and French colonial territories in Africa. Everyone had their turf. If you were a consumer in, say, Brazil, you were buying from whichever company Phoebus had assigned to control the Brazilian market. And that company had no incentive to compete on quality because they had a monopoly in that territory. They just had to make sure their bulbs didn't last more than 1,000 hours and maintain the agreed-upon prices. The price fixing was another crucial element. It didn't matter if Osram could manufacture bulbs cheaper than Philips. They'd both sell at similar prices because they'd agreed to. This eliminated the normal competitive pressure that drives prices down in a free market. Consumers paid more for products that were deliberately designed to fail faster. It was a double hit. Patent cross-licensing was the legal mechanism that made it all work. See, light bulb manufacturing required multiple patents: filament design, glass composition, base threading, gas filling techniques, you name it. Different companies owned different patents. Under normal competition, this creates patent wars. Companies sue each other constantly. But Phoebus members agreed to share their patents through cross-licensing agreements, which sounds nice until you realize it was a trap. The licensing agreements included clauses requiring adherence to quality standards, which was code for the 1,000-hour limit. If you violated the standards, you lost access to the patents. And without the patents, you couldn't manufacture bulbs at all. This meant that any company wanting to enter the light bulb business had to either join the cartel or face immediate patent lawsuits from multiple directions. It was like trying to join a game where the existing players get to make up the rules. And the first rule is new players have to make bad products too. Factory workers had no idea any of this was happening. A machinist in a General Electric factory in Cleveland and a glass blower in an Osram factory in Berlin were both just doing their jobs. They followed the specifications they were given. If management said make the filament 0.05 millimeters instead of 0.07 millimeters, they did it. They didn't know it was to make the bulb burn out faster. Some engineers must have suspected something. You don't spend years perfecting tungsten filament technology without understanding that certain design choices reduce lifespan, but they worked in a hierarchical corporate structure. You don't question orders from above, especially during economic uncertainty when losing your job meant real hardship. The conspiracy also required sophisticated communication networks. Remember, this is the 1920s and 30s. No email, no video calls. International communication meant telegrams, letters, and occasional in-person meetings. Yet somehow Phoebus managed to coordinate activities across dozens of countries with remarkable efficiency. They used code words and telegrams to discuss sensitive topics. Financial reports about standardization compliance were really reports about whether companies were successfully limiting bulb life. Travel by executives was often for technical conferences that were actually cartel coordination meetings. The entire operation was hidden in plain sight, disguised as normal business activities. World events complicated things. The Great Depression hit in 1929. Suddenly, people had less money to spend on light bulbs, even cheap ones. Sales dropped across the board. But Phoebus held firm. They didn't abandon the conspiracy because of the Depression. If anything, it made them more determined to maintain high prices and forced obsolescence. They needed every sale they could get. Technological developments also threatened the conspiracy. In the 1930s, fluorescent lighting started to emerge as a potential alternative to incandescent bulbs. Fluorescent tubes lasted much longer and used less electricity. This terrified the Phoebus members. If fluorescent lighting took off, the whole carefully constructed conspiracy could collapse. So what did they do? They tried to control fluorescent technology too. They filed patents. They bought up small companies developing fluorescent bulbs. They lobbied to keep fluorescent lighting limited to commercial and industrial use, away from residential consumers. They fought innovation because innovation threatened their profitable conspiracy. But there were rebels. Small manufacturers who refused to join Phoebus or who didn't have access to the major patents. They operated on the margins, selling to local markets, often getting sued constantly. In China, a company called Opel Electric Manufacturing became a thorn in Phoebus's side by producing cheap, long-life bulbs for the Chinese market. The Scandinavian resistance deserves special mention. Swedish and Danish manufacturers openly defied the cartel. They advertised their bulbs as longer-lasting and cheaper than the international brands. They positioned themselves as consumer champions fighting against foreign monopolies. It was genuine corporate heroism, even if motivated by profit rather than pure altruism. Phoebus tried to crush them through patent lawsuits and market manipulation, but the Scandinavian companies had enough local government protection and nationalist sentiment on their side to survive. They proved that the conspiracy could be challenged, but they couldn't expand beyond their region. Phoebus controlled too much of the global market, and that's when everything was about to change. Because just when the conspiracy seemed unbeatable, events on the world stage were about to tear it apart in ways none of these corporate executives could have predicted. September 1st, 1939. German forces invade Poland. Britain and France declare war on Germany. World War II begins. And in the offices of the Phoebus Cartel, executives suddenly have much bigger problems than enforcing 1,000-hour light bulb limits. The war didn't immediately destroy the conspiracy, but it made international coordination impossible. You can't exactly have friendly bismshy business meetings between German executives and British executives when their countries are trying to kill each other. The carefully constructed network of agreements, laboratories, and enforcement mechanisms began to crumble. The Swiss testing laboratory, which had been the linchpin of enforcement, became increasingly difficult to operate. Getting samples there required crossing war zones. International postal and shipping systems were disrupted. More importantly, the laboratory staff started leaving for other work. Switzerland was neutral, but everyone in Europe was affected by the war economy. Phoebus headquarters in Geneva tried to maintain operations, but it was futile. The member companies were now on opposite sides of a global conflict. General Electric was in America, which would soon join the Allies. Osram was in Nazi Germany. Philips was in the Netherlands, which was occupied by Germany in 1940. Tokyo Electric was in Japan, which would become part of the Axis powers. These companies couldn't coordinate a conspiracy when they were literally at war. But here's what's fascinating. The cartel officially dissolved, but the standard stuck. Even after Phoebus stopped operating as a formal organization, light bulb manufacturers continued making 1,000-hour bulbs. Why? Because they'd spent 15 years conditioning the entire industry to see that as normal. Engineers had been trained to design for that limit. Manufacturing equipment was calibrated for it. Consumer expectations were set. It's like how keyboard keys are still arranged in QWERTY, even though that layout was originally designed to slow down typists to prevent mechanical jams on typewriters. We don't use mechanical typewriters anymore, but the inefficient layout persists because everyone's used to it. The 1,000-hour standard became the QWERTY of light bulbs. During the war, light bulb quality actually got worse in many places. Not because of conspiracies, but because of material shortages. High-quality tungsten was needed for weapons manufacturing. Glass production was diverted to military uses. Factories were bombed. The labor force was conscripted. Bulbs from the war years were often terrible, lasting maybe 500 hours if you were lucky. This actually helped the manufacturers in a twisted way. After spending the 1930s slowly conditioning people to accept 1,000-hour bulbs, the war years made even worse bulbs seem normal. When the war ended and manufacturing returned to normal, 1,000 hours seemed like good quality by comparison. It was a reset of consumer expectations. After the war ended in 1945, there were half-hearted attempts to revive Phoebus. Some of the executives who'd survived the war years thought maybe they could restart the conspiracy. They met a few times. They discussed new agreements. But the world had changed. For one thing, antitrust sentiment was growing, especially in the United States. The war had been sold as a fight for freedom and democracy against tyranny and monopoly power. Coming home to discover that American companies were participating in international cartels didn't sit well with the public mood. Investigators started looking into corporate collaboration with Nazi Germany, and Phoebus came under scrutiny as part of that. More importantly, some of the key figures were gone. Meinhardt had died. Swope had retired. A new generation of executives was taking over, and not all of them were committed to maintaining the conspiracy. Some companies decided they could make more money by competing on quality rather than colluding to maintain inferior standards. But the damage was done. The concept of planned obsolescence had been proven viable. The 15-year experiment had shown that consumers would accept products designed to fail as long as the failure wasn't too obvious. Other industries were watching and learning. General Electric, in particular, took the lessons of Phoebus and applied them to other products: refrigerators, washing machines, electric motors. Why make something that lasts 40 years when you can make something that lasts 15 and sell 3 of them over the same period? The business logic was irresistible, but General Electric made a crucial mistake. They kept the documentation. All those contracts, memos, reports from the Swiss laboratory, correspondence between executives, everything was filed away in corporate archives. They thought the conspiracy was over, and the documents were just historical records. They didn't realize they were evidence. In 1949, the United States Department of Justice filed an antitrust lawsuit against General Electric and several other companies. The investigators had been digging through corporate records, and they'd found everything: the contracts, the fine schedules, the market division agreements. Anton Phillips's quote about not sinking back into the mire of making long-life lamps. It was all there. The trial was a sensation. For the first time, the public learned that major corporations had conspired to deliberately make inferior products. The newspapers had a field day. Consumer advocates were outraged. Congressmen gave speeches. General Electric's reputation took a massive hit. The company tried to defend itself by claiming that 1,000 hours was actually optimal for light bulb performance, that longer life bulbs were less efficient, that they were just following international standards. But the internal documents destroyed these arguments. You can't claim you were acting in consumers' best interests when your own executives wrote memos about avoiding long-life bulbs like they were a disease. On December 20, 1949, exactly 25 years and 3 days after the original conspiracy meeting in Geneva, the United States District Court ruled against General Electric. The judgment was devastating. The company had violated antitrust laws. They'd engaged in illegal market manipulation. They'd conspired to restrain trade. But here's the thing. The punishment was basically a slap on the wrist. General Electric paid some fines, which were tiny compared to their profits from decades of selling inferior bulbs. They signed a consent decree promising not to do it again. Some executives retired early with generous pensions. Nobody went to jail. The company kept operating, and the 1,000-hour standard continued. You know why? because the standard was now baked into the entire industry. Changing it would have required retooling factories, retraining engineers, redesigning products. It was easier and cheaper to just keep making 1,000-hour bulbs and claim that's what consumers wanted. The aftermath of the case revealed something disturbing. The legal system wasn't really set up to punish corporate crimes effectively. If an individual steals $1,000, they go to jail. If a corporation steals billions through systematic fraud over decades, they pay a fine and move on. The people who made the decisions, signed the contracts, and enforced the conspiracy mostly faced no personal consequences. And this created a moral hazard that we're still living with today. If the worst-case scenario for corporate conspiracy is paying some fines and promising not to do it again, what's to stop companies from trying? Especially if they can get away with it for 15 years and make astronomical profits? The Phoebus case should have been a turning point. It should have led to serious corporate reform, strong consumer protection laws, criminal penalties for executives who engage in fraud. Instead, it became a template. Other industries looked at what happened and learned that planned obsolescence was profitable and mostly legal, as long as you were careful about how you documented it. So the Phoebus Cartel was broken up, General Electric got a legal slap on the wrist, and everyone lived happily ever after, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Because what happened next shows how a conspiracy can win even after it's been exposed and prosecuted. The most immediate consequence was that nothing changed for consumers. After the 1949 court case, you might expect that light bulb manufacturers would immediately start making longer life bulbs to prove they'd reformed. But that's not what happened. The 1,000-hour standard remained. Not because of an active conspiracy anymore, but because it had become the industry norm. Engineers who'd spent years designing to the 1,000-hour limit didn't suddenly redesign everything. Manufacturing processes optimized for that standard didn't change overnight. And crucially, consumers didn't demand change because most of them didn't even know what had happened. The court case made news, but it wasn't like today, where social media can turn something into a massive public outcry. Most people never heard about it. But the bigger consequence was that other industries learned from Phoebus. They saw that planned obsolescence worked. They saw that consumers would accept it. They saw that even if you got caught, the punishment was minimal. And they started applying the same principles to their own products. The automobile industry was one of the first to embrace planned obsolescence openly. In the 1950s, car manufacturers started introducing annual model changes, not because the technology was improving significantly year to year, but to make last year's model seem outdated. They called it dynamic obsolescence. Your car still runs fine, but it looks old-fashioned, so you feel pressure to upgrade. Alfred Sloan, the president of General Motors, explicitly talked about this strategy. He said the goal was to create a car for every person purpose, but also to make people want new cars even when their old ones worked. Change the styling, add some chrome, reshape the tail fins, make the previous model look embarrassingly out of date. It was Phoebus for automobiles, just using psychological obsolescence instead of engineered failure. The appliance industry went even further. Refrigerators, washing machines, dryers, all started being designed with shorter lifespans. If you talk to anyone who owned appliances in the 1950s and 60s, they'll tell you those machines lasted forever. 20, 30, 40 years of service. Modern appliances, 10 years if you're lucky, and that's being generous. Why? Because manufacturers realized they could use cheaper materials, simpler construction, and design choices that guaranteed failure within a predictable time frame. And they could market this as innovation. New and improved models every few years. Never mind that your grandmother's washing machine from 1950 still works, while your fancy digital model from 5 years ago is already broken. The electronics industry took this to an art form. Radios and televisions in the 1960s and 70s started incorporating components that were deliberately designed to fail. Capacitors that would degrade. Resistors that would burn out. Circuit boards that couldn't be repaired, only replaced. And the replacements were often more expensive than buying a new unit. This led to the throwaway culture we live in today. Something breaks? Don't fix it. Replace it. And manufacturers loved this because it meant guaranteed repeat sales. They could plan their production, forecast revenue, manage inventory, all based on predictable product failure rates. Planned obsolescence became a cornerstone of modern capitalism. But the most insidious consequence of Phoebus was that it changed consumer expectations. People born after 1950 grew up in a world where products were expected to fail. Their parents might remember when things lasted, but for them, having to replace your phone every 2 years or your laptop every 5 seemed normal. The idea that a product should last a lifetime became quaint, old-fashioned, unrealistic. This had environmental consequences that nobody anticipated in the 1920s. When the Phoebus executives were plotting to make bulbs burn out faster, they weren't thinking about landfills. But planned obsolescence means more waste. Those light bulbs that died after 1,000 hours, instead of 2,500, created millions of tons of glass and metal waste over the decades. Scale that up to every consumer product, every phone, laptop, appliance, car, piece of furniture, and you start to understand why we have a waste crisis. We're drowning in garbage, partly because corporations decided in the 1920s that making things die faster was profitable. The Phoebus Cartel didn't just defraud consumers. They accidentally helped create the environmental disaster of perpetual consumption. The economic consequences were complex. On one hand, planned obsolescence created jobs. Factories had to keep running to produce replacement products. Repair technicians were needed to fix things that broke. Salespeople sold new models. In a twisted way, intentionally inferior products stimulated economic activity. This is why some economists and business leaders defended planned obsolescence. They argued it was good for the economy. It kept people employed. It drove innovation, at least cosmetically. It generated tax revenue. Why should we make products that last forever and put people out of work? But this logic ignores that the same resources, labor, and creativity could have been directed toward genuine innovation rather than planned failure. Instead of making 20 phones that each last 2 years, we could make 2 phones that each last 20 years and spend the rest of our engineering talent solving real problems. But that's not how the system works, when quarterly profits matter more than long-term sustainability. The social consequences were equally profound. Planned obsolescence contributed to the consumerist culture that defines modern life. The message became, you are what you own, and what you own should be constantly upgraded. This creates anxiety, competition, waste, and a perpetual sense that what you have isn't good enough. Marketing evolved to support this. Advertising stopped being about product quality and durability. Instead, it focused on newness, trendiness, social status. Apple became the master of this. They convinced people to camp out overnight to buy a phone that's marginally better than the one they already own. That's the legacy of Phoebus. Consumption for consumption's sake. The conspiracy also eroded trust between consumers and corporations. Once people learned that companies had literally conspired to make products worse, it became harder to believe corporate claims about anything. When a company says their new model is better, is it really? Or is it just different? When they say a battery that degrades after 2 years is for safety, should we believe them? This trust deficit affects everything from public health campaigns to environmental initiatives. If corporations will lie about light bulbs, what else are they lying about? The Phoebus Cartel contributed to the cynicism that characterizes modern consumer culture. And here's what really gets me. They didn't even have to do it. Phoebus wasn't some necessary evil. The light bulb market in the 1920s wasn't dying. Electrification was expanding globally. There were billions of potential customers who didn't have electric light yet. The companies could have competed honestly, improved their products, and still made enormous profits. But they chose the easy route. They chose collusion over competition. They chose short-term profits over long-term reputation. They chose to defraud consumers rather than serve them. And they got away with it because the systems we created to regulate corporations were, and still are, inadequate. The saddest part? We learned the wrong lessons. Instead of seeing Phoebus as a warning about corporate power, we normalized the behavior. Instead of strengthening regulations, we weakened them. Instead of punishing the executives who orchestrated the conspiracy, we turned them into business school case studies. The villains became success stories. Now let's talk about what happened next, because this is where the story gets really uncomfortable. The Phoebus Cartel officially ended in the 1940s. The court case wrapped up in 1949. But planned obsolescence didn't die. It evolved. It got smarter. It got more sophisticated. And it spread to literally every industry you can think of. Walk into any store today, and you're surrounded by products designed to fail. Your smartphone? The battery is glued in so you can't replace it. Your laptop? The RAM is soldered to the motherboard so you can't upgrade it. Your car? It has proprietary sensors and computer systems that only the dealer can service. Your printer? It counts how many pages you've printed and stops working when it hits an arbitrary limit. That printer thing is real, by the way. Printer manufacturers build chip counters into their devices that trigger end-of-life messages even when the printer mechanically works fine. They claim it's to prevent damage from old ink or worn parts, but independent technicians have shown you can reset these counters and the printer works for years longer. It's Phoebus for the 21st century. And just like Phoebus, modern companies don't call it planned obsolescence. They have better marketing terms. Product lifecycle management, sustainable upgrade cycles, safety features, environmental protection. But strip away the corporate speak, and it's the same thing. Deliberately limiting product lifespan to force repeat purchases. Apple is probably the most successful practitioner of modern planned obsolescence. They've mastered the art of making products that work perfectly until they don't. The infamous Batterygate scandal revealed that Apple was deliberately slowing down older iPhones through software updates, allegedly to preserve battery life. But conveniently, the slowdown made people think their phones were obsolete and they needed to upgrade. Apple paid fines and promised to be more transparent, just like General Electric did in 1949. The fines were tiny compared to their profits. The executives faced no personal consequences. The company kept doing what it was doing. Sound familiar? But at least Apple products are high quality while they work. Some manufacturers have gone the opposite route. Cheap products designed to be completely disposable. Fast fashion is the extreme example. Clothes made so poorly they fall apart after a few washes. Not because we don't know how to make durable clothing, but because it's more profitable to sell someone 20 cheap shirts than 2 expensive ones. The electronics waste crisis is directly traceable to the Phoebus mindset. We generate over 50 million tons of electronic waste every year. Old phones, computers, TVs, all designed to be unrepairable and dumped in landfills or shipped to developing countries where they poison the environment. This is the physical manifestation of planned obsolescence multiplied across the entire consumer economy. And just like Phoebus created a Swiss testing laboratory to enforce bad quality, modern companies use software to achieve the same goal. Digital rights management, proprietary spare parts, activation servers that can remotely disable your device. The technology has changed, but the principle is identical. Prevent people from keeping products working longer than the manufacturer wants. The right to repair movement has emerged in response, and it's fighting the exact same battle that Scandinavian manufacturers fought against Phoebus in the 1930s. Activists and small businesses demanding the ability to fix products. Manufacturers claiming it's about safety or intellectual property protection, or environmental standards. But really, it's about maintaining the profitable cycle of forced replacement. Some countries are starting to push back. France passed laws requiring manufacturers to display repairability scores. The European Union is considering regulations mandating replaceable batteries and available spare parts. These are good steps, but they're tiny compared to the scale of the problem. It's like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon. The software industry has created a whole new dimension of planned obsolescence. Your device might work fine physically, but if the manufacturer stops supporting the software, it becomes useless. Old iPhones can't run new apps. Old Android phones don't get security updates. Old computers can't run new operating systems. You're forced to upgrade not because the hardware failed, but because the software is deliberately abandoned. And this ties into the subscription economy, which is planned obsolescence taken to its logical extreme. Why sell a product that fails when you can sell a service that never really belongs to the customer? Adobe switched from selling Photoshop to renting it monthly. Microsoft wants you to subscribe to Office. Car companies are experimenting with subscription features where you pay monthly to unlock heated seats that are already installed in your car. This is more profitable than planned obsolescence because you don't even have to engineer failure. The product keeps working, but you keep paying. Forever. It's brilliant and horrible. The gaming industry has its own version. Online multiplayer games that require server connections. And when the company shuts down the servers, your game is worthless even though the disc works fine. Digital games that you purchase but don't actually own. If the company decides to revoke your license, your entire library disappears. The automotive industry is getting worse. Modern cars have computers that control everything, and those computers are programmed to make independent repair difficult or impossible. The engine might be fine, but if a sensor fails and the replacement sensor needs to be activated by dealer software you don't have access to, your car is dead. It's planned obsolescence through complexity, and we accept it. That's the most disturbing part. Phoebus conditioned the generation of the 1930s and 40s to accept 1,000-hour light bulbs. Modern corporations have conditioned us to accept products that fail, software that abandons us, services that extract our money forever. We think it's normal because we've never known anything else. The environmental cost is becoming impossible to ignore. Climate change, pollution, resource depletion, all exacerbated by an economic system that requires perpetual consumption of products designed to fail. We're literally destroying the planet to maintain profit margins based on a conspiracy from the 1920s. But there's some hope. The rise of open-source hardware and software shows that alternatives are possible. Companies like Fairphone making modular, repairable smartphones, Framework making upgradable laptops, right-to-repair legislation passing in some jurisdictions, a growing movement of people refusing to accept planned obsolescence. The younger generation seems more aware of these issues. They've grown up with smartphones that die after 2 years and laptops that can't be upgraded. They've seen the environmental cost. They're starting to demand better. Not everyone, but enough to matter. Some companies are experimenting with new business models, selling durable goods and making profit from services or repairs rather than replacement. It's early days, but it shows that the Phoebus model isn't inevitable. We chose to embrace planned obsolescence. We can choose to reject it. But that requires changing how we measure economic success. Growth based on consumption is fundamentally incompatible with sustainability. If our economy requires everyone to constantly buy new things, we can't simultaneously address environmental crises. Something has to give. The Phoebus Cartel started us down this path, but we've had decades to change course. We didn't because the incentives favor continuation. Shareholders want quarterly growth. Executives get bonuses for short-term profits. Politicians depend on consumer spending for economic statistics. The whole system reinforces planned obsolescence. Breaking this cycle requires legal reform, corporate accountability, consumer awareness, and a willingness to value durability over convenience. It's possible, but it won't be easy. The forces that benefit from planned obsolescence are enormously powerful and have no incentive to change. Let's dig into the legal and ethical mess that the Phoebus Cartel created, because this is where things get really complicated. On the surface, it seems simple. Companies conspired to defraud consumers. That's illegal. Case closed. But the reality is much murkier and reveals some disturbing truths about how our legal and economic systems actually work. First, the legal question. Was the Phoebus Cartel actually illegal everywhere it operated? The answer is complicated. In the United States, yes, it clearly violated antitrust laws, which is why General Electric lost the court case in 1949. But antitrust law in the 1920s was much weaker than today. The Sherman Antitrust Act existed, but enforcement was sporadic and penalties were mild. In Europe, cartel behavior was actually pretty normal in the 1920s and 30s. Governments often encouraged companies in the same industry to coordinate to prevent wasteful competition. The idea that businesses should compete freely was less universally accepted than it is today. Some European countries had laws against cartels, but they were rarely enforced. Switzerland, where Phoebus was headquartered, was particularly friendly to cartel arrangements. Swiss law allowed business agreements that would be illegal elsewhere. That's why Phoebus chose Switzerland, not just for banking secrecy, but for legal protection. The Swiss government benefited from hosting international business operations, so they had little incentive to crack down. This raises an uncomfortable question. If something is legal in one jurisdiction but illegal in another, is it morally wrong? Phoebus executives could argue they were following the law where they operated. The fact that their activities also affected countries where such behavior was illegal was, from their perspective, someone else's problem. This is the same logic modern corporations use with tax havens and regulatory arbitrage. Set up in the jurisdiction with the most favorable laws, conduct business globally, and claim you're not breaking any rules. It's legal, but is it ethical? Phoebus pioneered this approach. The ethical questions are even messier. Let's start with the most basic one. Is it wrong to design products to fail? Most people's gut reaction is yes. Of course it's wrong. If you can make something that lasts 10 years, deliberately making it last only 2 years is fraud. You're cheating customers out of value they could have received. But economists have counter-arguments. They say planned obsolescence drives innovation by creating incentive to improve products. If a light bulb lasted forever, why would anyone bother inventing better lighting technology? Competition for repeat sales pushes companies to innovate. Maybe LED bulbs wouldn't exist if incandescent bulbs lasted 20 years. This argument has some merit, but it falls apart on examination. Real innovation means making better products, not just different ones. A phone that lasts 5 years with a better camera is innovation. A phone that lasts 2 years with a marginally better camera, but a non-replaceable battery is planned obsolescence disguised as innovation. There's also the argument from employment. Planned obsolescence creates jobs. If products lasted forever, manufacturing would shrink, unemployment would rise, economic growth would slow. By this logic, the Phoebus Cartel was actually helping workers by ensuring steady demand for light bulbs. But this is what economists call the broken window fallacy. Yes, breaking windows creates work for window makers, but the money spent replacing windows could have been spent on something else that also creates jobs while adding value instead of just replacing what was destroyed. Planned obsolescence is economically inefficient, even if it maintains employment in specific industries. The environmental ethics are clearer. Making products that need frequent replacement uses more resources, creates more waste, and contributes to environmental destruction. There's no good ethical argument for this. Defenders of planned obsolescence try to claim that newer products are more efficient, so frequent replacement is actually environmental. But this is mostly nonsense. The environmental cost of manufacturing usually far exceeds any efficiency gains. Then there's the question of consumer autonomy. When Phoebus decided that light bulbs should last 1,000 hours, they made that choice for consumers. They didn't offer a premium tier with longer life bulbs. They didn't let the market decide. They unilaterally decided what level of quality consumers deserved and enforced it through conspiracy. This is paternalistic at best, tyrannical at worst. In a free market, consumers should have choices. Want a cheap bulb that lasts 6 months? Buy it. Want an expensive bulb that lasts 5 years? That should also be available. Phoebus eliminated choice and claimed they were doing consumers a favor by standardizing the market. Modern companies do the same thing. You can't buy a flagship smartphone with a replaceable battery. The option doesn't exist. Companies decided for you that thin design is more important than longevity. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but you don't get to choose. The class dimensions are important too. Planned obsolescence disproportionately hurts poor people. If you're wealthy, replacing your phone every 2 years is an annoyance. If you're poor, it's a financial disaster. Products that fail force the poor to spend money they don't have on replacements they shouldn't need. It's a regressive tax on poverty. Rich people can also buy higher quality products when they exist. They shop at stores that stock durable goods. They can afford repairs. They have the time and resources to maintain things. Poor people are stuck with cheap products designed to fail, sold at stores that don't offer better alternatives. Planned obsolescence entrenches economic inequality. There's also the question of informed consent. If a company tells you up front that their product is designed to fail after 2 years, and you buy it anyway, is that fraud? Or is that just transparent business? Arguably, if consumers have full information, they can make their own choices. But information asymmetry is real. Companies know exactly how long their products will last because they designed them. Consumers don't have that information. They have to rely on warranties and marketing claims, both of which are designed to obscure, rather than reveal, true product lifespan. The playing field isn't level. The Phoebus executives never told consumers that bulbs could last longer but were deliberately limited. They actively promoted the 1,000-hour standard as optimal. They used their scientific authority to mislead. That's not just bad business, it's fraud. Modern companies are more sophisticated. They hide behind complexity. The battery degradation is a natural consequence of lithium-ion chemistry. Technically true, but the rate of degradation is a design choice. They could use higher quality cells, better charging algorithms, replaceable batteries. They choose not to. The international legal framework is inadequate to address modern planned obsolescence. The World Trade Organization rules prevent countries from banning imports based on product durability standards. Environmental regulations focus on efficiency during use, not on total product lifespan. Patent law protects proprietary designs even when they prevent repairs. We need new legal tools. Some jurisdictions are experimenting with right-to-repair laws, extended producer responsibility, minimum durability standards. But these are piecemeal solutions to a systemic problem. As long as the economic incentives favor planned obsolescence, companies will find ways around regulations. The ethics of corporate responsibility are complicated by the shareholder primacy doctrine. Many executives genuinely believe their only obligation is to maximize shareholder returns. If planned obsolescence is profitable, they have a duty to pursue it. The fact that it harms consumers, workers, or the environment is not their problem. This doctrine is relatively recent and not universally accepted, but it dominates corporate culture in many countries. It creates a moral hazard where executives can justify terrible decisions by claiming fiduciary duty. I'd love to make better products, but my shareholders demand growth. But shareholders are also consumers. They're also breathing the polluted air created by wasteful manufacturing, They're also leaving a degraded planet to their children. Short-term financial returns ignore these externalities. The system is designed to privatize profits while socializing costs. The Phoebus Cartel demonstrated that market failures are real and significant. The free market didn't prevent the conspiracy. Competition didn't save consumers. In fact, competition is what motivated the conspiracy. Companies were competing, and they decided the best way to win was to stop competing. This suggests that markets need robust regulation to function properly. Antitrust enforcement, consumer protection laws, environmental standards, these aren't constraints on the free market. They're necessary conditions for the free market to work. Without them, you get Phoebus. But regulation is a constant battle. Industries lobby against it. They claim it stifles innovation and destroys jobs. Sometimes they're right. Badly designed regulations can do harm. But the absence of regulation demonstrably led to systematic consumer fraud. The question is not whether to regulate, but how. The ethical legacy of Phoebus is that it normalized deception in commerce. It established that corporations will prioritize profit over honesty if given the opportunity. It showed that the penalties for fraud are often less than the profits from fraud. This created a culture of acceptable corruption that pervades modern business. Now let's talk about what happened to the people and companies involved in the Phoebus Cartel. Because unlike most historical stories where villains get their comeuppance, this one has a frustratingly anticlimactic ending. Spoiler alert, most of them did just fine. William Meinhardt, the Osram chairman who masterminded the conspiracy, lived a long and prosperous life. He retired from Osram in the 1930s, before the war, with a generous pension. He was never prosecuted for his role in the cartel. He never had to testify in court. He died peacefully, probably surrounded by family, his reputation intact in Germany. Osram, the company he led, survived World War II despite being based in Nazi Germany. After the war, it was broken up temporarily by Allied occupation authorities, but it reformed in the 1950s and continued operating. Today, Osram is still a major lighting manufacturer. They make LED bulbs now. Their corporate history mentions the Phoebus Cartel briefly, if at all, and always in sanitized language about industry coordination. Anton Phillips, the quotable villain who wrote about avoiding the mire of long-life bulbs, also faced zero personal consequences. He ran Philips until 1951, retiring as one of the most successful businessmen in Dutch history. He was knighted by the Dutch Queen. He died in 1951, respected and honored. His company, Philips, is today a massive multinational corporation worth billions. Gerard Swope, the General Electric president, retired in 1939, right before the war, with his reputation as a captain of industry intact. He'd been offered a position in Franklin Roosevelt's administration, but declined. He consulted for the government during the war. He died in 1957, his obituaries praising his business acumen and public service. The Phoebus Cartel was barely mentioned. General Electric paid fines in the 1949 court case, but they were laughably small compared to the profits they'd made from decades of planned obsolescence. The company continued to dominate the American lighting market. They expanded into other industries. They became one of the most valuable corporations in the world. The cartel scandal was a minor speed bump in their growth trajectory. The Swiss testing laboratory was quietly shut down during the war years. The documents were archived. The equipment was sold or scrapped. The technicians who'd spent years measuring light bulb lifespans and issuing fines moved on to other jobs. Nobody ever investigated what happened to the fine money collected over 15 years. It presumably disappeared into corporate accounts. Phoebus SA, the cartel organization, officially dissolved, but there's no clear record of when or how. It just stopped operating during the war and never restarted. The registration in Switzerland lapsed. The office closed. It faded away like a ghost, leaving only documents in archives that historians would discover decades later. Most of the member companies survived and thrived. Tungsram in Hungary became state-owned under communism but continued manufacturing. Japanese companies like Tokyo Electric evolved into modern corporations. French lighting companies merged and consolidated. The global lighting industry today is dominated by descendants of Phoebus members. None of the engineers who actually implemented the design changes to make bulbs fail faster were ever identified or punished. They were just doing their jobs, following specifications from management. The secretaries who typed the incriminating memos retired with pensions. The lawyers who structured the cartel moved on to other clients. The bankers who handled the money faced no scrutiny. The Scandinavian companies that resisted Phoebus did better in the short term. They built reputations for quality and honesty. But over time, they faced the same market pressures as everyone else. Eventually, they had to either compete on price, by reducing quality, or get acquired by larger companies. Most chose acquisition. Resistance was profitable briefly. Then it became impossible. The Chinese manufacturers who competed against Phoebus, particularly Opel Electric, had mixed fates. Some survived by focusing on domestic markets where Phoebus couldn't easily reach. Others were destroyed by Japanese competition after World War II. The Chinese lighting industry grew massively after the Communist Revolution, but followed different dynamics than the Western market. The independent manufacturers who tried to fight Phoebus through the courts mostly lost or ran out of money before getting justice. Patent litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Large corporations can afford to tie up small competitors in legal battles for years. Even when the small companies were right, they often went bankrupt before winning. The consumers who'd been defrauded never received compensation. There was no class action lawsuit, no refunds, no apologies. The court case against General Electric was criminal and regulatory, not civil. The money went to the government, not to the people who'd overpaid for inferior light bulbs over decades. The workers in light bulb factories saw minimal impact from the cartel's exposure. Some factories closed as manufacturing moved to cheaper locations, but that was due to broader economic trends, not the conspiracy ending. Jobs in the lighting industry continued to decline through automation and outsourcing. The cartel's collapse didn't save anyone's job. The environmental damage from 15 years of accelerated light bulb waste was never quantified or addressed. Nobody calculated how many extra tons of glass and tungsten went into landfills because bulbs were designed to fail at 1,000 hours instead of 2,500. Nobody was held accountable for this waste. The market didn't correct itself after the conspiracy ended. The 1,000-hour standard remained because changing industry-wide practices requires coordination, and nobody wanted to be the first mover. If one company started making 2,000-hour bulbs while everyone else stuck to 1,000, they'd sell fewer bulbs and lose market share. The conspiracy's effects outlived the conspiracy. Some historians argue that the Phoebus Cartel actually ended not because of legal action, but because fluorescent and later LED technology made incandescent bulb longevity less relevant. Why worry about making incandescent bulbs last longer when the whole technology was becoming obsolete? The market moved on, and the conspiracy became irrelevant. The court case itself was important symbolically, but had limited practical impact. It established legal precedent that cartel behavior violated American antitrust law. It exposed internal corporate documents showing the conspiracy's mechanisms. It embarrassed General Electric temporarily, but it didn't fundamentally change how corporations operated. In the years after the case, General Electric and other defendants created better legal structures for their questionable activities. They used more careful language in internal communications. They structured agreements to be technically legal, even if ethically dubious. They learned to be more discreet, not to be more honest. The executives who were directly involved in the conspiracy but survived to see its exposure mostly stayed quiet. They didn't write memoirs confessing their sins. They didn't give interviews explaining their motivations. They took their knowledge to their graves, leaving historians to piece together the story from documents and court records. The companies themselves rewrote their histories. Official corporate histories mention Phoebus briefly, if at all, usually framing it as an unfortunate misunderstanding or an outdated business practice that wouldn't happen today. They emphasize their current innovation and quality while glossing over decades of deliberate product sabotage. And here's the really frustrating part. The lack of serious consequences encouraged other industries to try similar strategies. If the worst that happens is a fine and some bad press, why not coordinate to reduce product quality? Why not use planned obsolescence? The potential profits far exceed the potential penalties. This is why we need to talk about the Phoebus Cartel, not just as historical curiosity, but as cautionary tale. It showed that markets don't self-correct without enforcement, that corporations will conspire against consumers if they can, that the legal system often favors the powerful, that accountability matters, and without it, bad behavior repeats. The fall wasn't dramatic. There was no perp walk, no prison sentences, no seized assets, no bankruptcies. The cartel ended, the companies adapted, the executives retired comfortably, and the world moved on. The villains won. They made their fortunes, avoided punishment, and left a legacy that shapes how products are designed today. So where does this leave us? What's the ultimate legacy of the Phoebus Cartel nearly a century after it began? And more importantly, what does it tell us about the world we live in today? Because this isn't just history. This is a roadmap to understanding modern consumer culture. The conspiracy officially ended in the 1940s, legally concluded in 1949. But the 1,000-hour standard for incandescent bulbs persisted until LED technology made it irrelevant. Think about that. A standard created by corporate conspiracy in 1924 remained the industry norm for 80 years. Long after the cartel dissolved, long after the court case, the damage remained. But the real legacy isn't about light bulbs. It's about the concept of planned obsolescence, becoming normalized across every industry. Phoebus was the proof of concept. It showed that you could design products to fail, consumers would accept it, and profits would soar. Every industry was watching, and every industry learned. Today, planned obsolescence is so embedded in consumer culture that we barely notice it. Your phone needs replacing every 2 years? That's just how phones are. Your laptop slows down after 3 years? Technology ages. What can you do? Your car needs expensive repairs right after the warranty expires? Must be bad luck. We've accepted engineered failure as natural. But it's not natural. It's designed. Just like those 1920s light bulbs. The difference is, modern companies are better at hiding it. They use proprietary screws, so you can't open your devices. They glue components so you can't replace parts. They write software that updates older devices into sluggishness. They've learned from Phoebus to make the sabotage invisible. The smartphone industry is the clearest modern parallel. Apple, Samsung, Google, they all release new models annually, even though the technology improvements are marginal. They use software updates to slow older devices. They make batteries non-replaceable. They design cases that crack easily. And they've convinced us this is normal, that upgrading every 2 years is just what you do. But some of the old Phoebus tactics are still in use. The printer industry uses the same chip counting trick that Phoebus used in their Swiss laboratory. Printers count pages and trigger end-of-life messages at arbitrary limits. Independent repair techs can reset these counters, proving they're artificial. It's a digital version of the 1,000-hour limit. The auto industry has gotten sophisticated with planned obsolescence. Modern cars have computers controlling every system. Those computers use proprietary diagnostic software that only dealers have access to. An independent mechanic can't fix certain problems because the software won't let them. Your car might be mechanically fine, but digitally crippled. Phoebus would be proud. The fashion industry took planned obsolescence to its extreme with fast fashion. Clothes designed to fall apart after a few washes. Not because we forgot how to make durable clothing, but because selling someone 20 cheap shirts is more profitable than selling 2 quality ones. The environmental cost is catastrophic, but the business model works. Appliances are particularly offensive. Refrigerators, washing machines. Dryers that our grandparents bought in the 1950s still work. Modern equivalents die in 10 years. Manufacturers claim this is because of new features and efficiency standards, but that's mostly marketing. They could make durable appliances with modern features. They choose not to. The environmental impact of modern planned obsolescence dwarfs what Phoebus did. Electronic waste alone is over 50 million tons annually. Add in clothing, appliances, cars, furniture, and we're talking about an environmental disaster directly traceable to the business model Phoebus pioneered. We're destroying the planet to maintain a system of planned failure. But there are some differences between Phoebus and modern planned obsolescence. The lightbulb cartel was a secret conspiracy. Modern corporations don't need to conspire because the economic incentives align naturally. Every company independently concludes that planned obsolescence is profitable. They don't need secret meetings in Geneva because the market pushes them toward the same conclusion. This makes modern planned obsolescence harder to fight legally. You can prosecute a conspiracy, but you can't prosecute an emergent market behavior. Companies can claim they're just responding to consumer demand for new features, lower prices, sleek designs. How do you prove they're deliberately reducing durability versus making legitimate trade-offs? Some modern forms of planned obsolescence are arguably worse than Phoebus because they exploit psychological rather than engineering tricks. Social pressure to have the latest model, fear of missing out on new features, status anxiety about being seen with old technology. Phoebus made bulbs burn out. Modern marketing makes you feel like you're burning out if you don't upgrade. But there's growing resistance. The right to repair movement is gaining traction. Countries are passing laws requiring manufacturers to make parts available, to use standard screws, to allow independent repairs. It's a direct challenge to the Phoebus business model. The fight is just beginning, but it's happening. Some companies are experimenting with anti-obsolescence business models. Patagonia encourages repairing their clothing. Fairphone makes modular smartphones you can upgrade and repair. Framework makes laptops where every component is replaceable. These are niche players, but they prove alternatives exist. The economic argument is shifting too. As environmental costs become impossible to ignore, the case for durability strengthens. If we have to price in carbon emissions, resource depletion, and waste disposal, planned obsolescence starts looking economically irrational, even from a pure profit perspective. Consumer awareness is increasing. People are starting to understand that their phone dying after 2 years isn't bad luck or natural aging. It's designed that way. This knowledge changes behavior. Some people keep devices longer. Some seek repairable alternatives. Some vote for politicians who promise stricter regulations. The generational shift matters. Younger consumers who grew up with planned obsolescence are also the generation most concerned about environmental sustainability. They're beginning to reject the consumption cycle their parents accepted. Not universally, but enough to affect market dynamics. Technology could help or hurt. 3D printing might enable easier repairs and part replacement. Open source hardware and software could provide alternatives to proprietary systems. Or AI and increased automation could make planned obsolescence more sophisticated and harder to detect. The future isn't predetermined. Legal frameworks are slowly adapting. The European Union is leading with regulations on repairability, battery replacements, and software support. America is slower, but some states are passing right to repair laws. These are small steps, but they acknowledge the problem exists. Corporate rhetoric is shifting, at least superficially. Companies now talk about sustainability and circular economies. Some of this is greenwashing. But some companies genuinely seem interested in moving beyond throwaway culture. Whether this translates to real change or just better marketing remains to be seen. The ultimate question is whether we can break the cycle Phoebus started. Can we create an economy that values durability over disposability? Can we regulate planned obsolescence without stifling innovation? Can we change consumer expectations that have been shaped by a century of engineered failure? The Phoebus Cartel teaches us that markets don't self-correct against this kind of behavior. It's too profitable. Without intervention, companies will keep designing products to fail because it makes financial sense. The intervention has to come from consumers, regulators, and maybe a cultural shift in how we think about ownership and value. There's a philosophical dimension too. Planned obsolescence reflects a worldview where everything is temporary, disposable, replaceable, where relationships between people and objects are transactional rather than meaningful, where craftsmanship and durability are quaint rather than valuable. Fighting planned obsolescence means fighting this worldview. The story of Phoebus isn't over. It continues every time a product fails before it should, every time a company designs in failure, every time we accept disposability as normal. Understanding this history is the first step to changing the future. But it's only the first step. So let's bring this back around to where we started. December 23rd, 1924. A group of executives in Geneva deciding that light bulbs should die faster than necessary. One decision, made in secret, that changed the world in ways those men probably never imagined. They thought they were just stabilizing their industry, protecting their profits, being smart businessmen. They didn't realize they were creating a blueprint that would define modern capitalism. They didn't know that planned obsolescence would spread from light bulbs to every product category. They didn't anticipate the environmental catastrophe their business model would enable. They just wanted to sell more bulbs. But here's what haunts me about this story. They succeeded. Not just in the short term, making money for 15 years before the conspiracy was exposed. They succeeded in the long term by normalizing the idea that products should be designed to fail. The Phoebus Cartel lost the legal battle in 1949, but they won the cultural war. We live in the world Phoebus built. Look around your home right now. How many products are designed to last? How many could last longer, but won't because that's not how they're engineered? Your phone with the glued-in battery, your laptop with the soldered RAM, your printer with the page counter, your appliances that die right after the warranty expires. That's all Phoebus's legacy. And the frustrating part? We know better. We have the technology to make durable products. We understand the environmental cost of disposable culture. We have historical evidence that planned obsolescence is economically inefficient and ethically wrong. But we keep doing it because the incentives haven't changed since 1924. The executives who ran Phoebus faced minimal consequences. The companies thrived. The practice spread. And that taught every subsequent generation of business leaders that planned obsolescence is acceptable, profitable, and sustainable. Until it's not. Because the environmental bill is coming due, and it's going to be catastrophic. Climate change, resource depletion, pollution, waste crisis, all of these are connected to consumption patterns that planned obsolescence drives. We can't solve environmental problems without addressing the design disposability of modern products. The throwaway culture has to end, and that means confronting the Phoebus legacy. But there's hope in understanding the history. Planned obsolescence wasn't inevitable. It was chosen. The Phoebus executives made a decision to prioritize profits over quality. That decision could have been different, and every decision since then could have been different. Which means future decisions can be different too. The right to repair movement shows that people are fighting back. Laws requiring replaceable batteries and available parts are being passed. Companies experimenting with durable repairable products are finding customers. The tide might be turning slowly, but it's happening. consumer choice matters too. Every time you repair something instead of replacing it, you're voting against planned obsolescence. Every time you buy from companies that prioritize durability, you're sending a market signal. Every time you keep a device working past its designed lifespan, you're resisting the Phoebus model. Political action is crucial. Support politicians who advocate for right-to-repair laws, environmental regulations, corporate accountability. Contact your representatives about planned obsolescence. Vote for measures that require product durability standards. The Phoebus Cartel ended because governments finally acted. Modern planned obsolescence will only end the same way. Education is powerful. Most people don't know about Phoebus. They don't understand that planned obsolescence is deliberate. They think products just naturally fail after a couple years. Sharing this history, explaining the mechanisms, raising awareness, that changes minds and behaviors. The comparison to modern tech companies is important. When people learn that Apple slowed down old iPhones deliberately, that printer companies use artificial page limits, that manufacturers design products to be unrepairable, they get angry. That anger is justified and potentially transformative if channeled into action. But we also need to be realistic. Planned obsolescence is deeply embedded in our economic system. It drives employment, tax revenue, corporate profits, stock market growth. Changing it means changing fundamental aspects of capitalism. That's not impossible, but it's hard and will face massive resistance from powerful interests. The environmental argument might be what finally breaks the Phoebus model. As climate change becomes impossible to ignore, as resource scarcity drives up costs, as waste disposal becomes untenable, the economic case for durability strengthens. When externalities get priced in, planned obsolescence stops being profitable. We need new metrics for economic success. GDP growth driven by forced replacement purchases isn't sustainable. We need to measure economic health by quality of life, environmental sustainability, resource efficiency, not just consumption volume. That's a massive shift in thinking, but it's necessary. The younger generation gives me hope. They're more environmentally conscious, more skeptical of corporate claims, more willing to repair and reuse. They're growing up with planned obsolescence, but also with awareness of its costs. They might be the ones who finally reject the model their great-grandparents accepted. Technology could be part of the solution. 3D printing, open-source designs, modular construction, all of these enable repair and replacement at the component level. If you can print a replacement part at home, planned obsolescence loses power. If software is open source, artificial limitations can be bypassed. But technology could also make things worse. More sophisticated chips means more complex sabotage. AI-driven planned obsolescence that adapts to user behavior. Software kills that can't be detected or circumvented. The same tools that enable repair also enable more effective product death. The fight against planned obsolescence is ultimately a fight about values. Do we value durability or convenience? Sustainability or consumption? Long-term thinking or quarterly profits? The questions Phoebus forced us to confront are still relevant, still urgent, still unresolved. This story matters because it shows that the world we live in was created by human decisions, not natural forces. The executives in that Geneva room in 1924 made choices. We can make different choices. The future isn't predetermined by the past. So what do you think? Now that you know about the Phoebus Cartel, does it change how you see the products around you? Do you look at your phone differently knowing the battery could be replaceable but isn't? Does it bother you that your printer might have an artificial page limit? Are you angry that we've normalized designed failure? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it? Because awareness without action doesn't change anything. The Phoebus executives counted on people not knowing, not caring, not acting. Prove them wrong. Let me know in the comments what you think about planned obsolescence. Do you repair your devices or replace them? Have you ever experienced obvious design failure? What products do you own that have lasted way longer than expected. Share your stories. If you found this story eye-opening, hit that like button. It helps more people discover this history that corporations would rather keep buried. And subscribe for more deep dives into the corporate conspiracies and industrial secrets that shape the modern world. Check out the documentary The Lightbulb Conspiracy from 2010 if you want to learn more. Read about right to repair legislation in your area and support it if you can. Look into companies like Fairphone and Framework that are trying to build a different model. The Phoebus Cartel started a century ago, but the battle it began continues today. We're all living inside the world they created. But we don't have to stay here. Change is possible. It starts with understanding what happened, why it happened, and deciding it can't keep happening. That bulb in Livermore, California, the one that's been burning since 1901, it's still going. Over 120 years of continuous operation. That's what light bulbs could be if they weren't deliberately designed to fail. That's what all our products could be. The Phoebus executives are dead. The company's evolved. The conspiracy ended. But the legacy lives on in every device designed to die, every battery that can't be replaced, every product that costs more to repair than replace. Until we confront that legacy, we're still living in Phoebus's world. This was the story of the Phoebus Cartel, the conspiracy that invented planned obsolescence and changed the world forever. Thanks for watching. Now go repair something.